think you know everything about Queen Elizabeth I, the queen whose coffin was a ticking time bomb, ready to burst from the gases of decay, whose dying wish was trampled on as her body was gutted like a carcass and stuffed with spices to mask the stench of death, and who was ultimately buried right on top of the rotting corpse of her mortal enemy. This is the story of her final terror and posthumous humiliation that they'll never teach you in school. Her final terror was ignored. All right, buckle up. Today, we're diving into the darkest corners of the mind of one of the most powerful women in history. And you know who's on the chopping block today? None other than Elizabeth I herself. That's right, the Virgin Queen, the original Iron Lady. And here's the kicker. Her final, terrifying plea, her most desperate and dying wish, was completely trampled on. For her entire life, she held England in an iron fist, but at the very end, she herself was gripped by a cold, clammy panic, and she wasn't afraid of death. Oh no, she was terrified of what they would do to her body after. Can you imagine? The monarch who made kings tremble was lying on her deathbed, begging her courtiers, "Do not open my body, no embalming, leave me be." She wanted to meet her god whole, not gutted like some animal at the market. Think this was just an old woman's ramblings, a royal whim? Not a chance. This is the part they leave out of the boring history books. Her fear had a name, and that name was Mary, Queen of Scots, her own cousin whom she had sent to the executioner's block. Let's transport ourselves to that execution for a second. Elizabeth knew every detail, every single one. She knew it took the executioner 2 swings of the axe to sever Mary's head from her body, that the head was still attached by a sliver of flesh and had to be sawn off with a knife. But wait, it gets worse. That's when the real horror began. Mary's body, headless but still warm, was dragged into an adjoining room, and there, the surgeons began the bloodbath we now call embalming. Just so you grasp the sheer brutality of it, they sliced her open, pulled out her still warm, steaming entrails, and scraped her clean down to the last sinew. The smell was so vile, it made seasoned guardsmen retch. The empty shell was then packed with salt, spices, and herbs to stop it from rotting, stitched up crudely, like a sack of grain. That was a royal embalming in the 16th century. And Elizabeth, signing that death warrant, knew she was condemning her cousin to this exact posthumous violation. And so now, lying in her own bed, she wasn't seeing angels. She was seeing the blood-stained hands of surgeons reaching for her. She heard the crack of ribs and the squelch of the knife. The vision haunted her, drove her mad. She refused food, refused doctors, clinging to life just to postpone that moment. Her dying wish was to escape that nightmare. And the result? The moment her heart stopped, her courtiers exchanged a look and followed protocol to the letter. Her body was cut open, gutted, and stuffed with spices. Her greatest fear became a reality the instant she stopped breathing. Her will, the will of a great queen, was simply ignored. So the next time you see her regal portrait in a textbook, just remember how that all-powerful woman was scared shitless of the surgeon's scalpel, and how her fear was completely justified. Her body was carved up like a side of beef. All right, ready for the gory details? Then you'd better hold on tight. Today we're talking about what happened to her body after she died. And yes, the headline doesn't lie. She was carved up like a side of beef at the market. Forget delicate, precise surgical cuts. Picture one long, crude incision running from her throat right down to her groin. It wasn't made to study the cause of death or to pay final respects. No, It was made to clean her out, completely. And this is where it gets truly disgusting. The physicians, or whatever they were, shoved their bare hands right inside her body. Do you get that? Not with a delicate scalpel, but with their hands. They scooped everything out: heart, lungs, stomach, intestines, absolutely everything that had made her a living person. It was all dumped into a basin with a sickening slop and squelch. To give you a sense of the humiliation, that's how you gut a pig for a feast, not how you lay a queen to rest. In a matter of minutes, her body was turned into an empty, lifeless shell. But wait, there's more. What did they do with that hideous void inside her? Just leave it? Of course not. And this is where the true cynicism of the whole procedure lies. They don't tell you this in the history books, with their talk of lavish funerals and grieving courtiers. The emptied abdominal cavity was stuffed to the brim with herbs. But not just any old wildflowers. We're talking expensive imported spices: myrrh, cinnamon, cloves, frankincense. A king's ransom was spent on this stuffing. Think this was some sacred ritual, an attempt to preserve the body for eternity, like the Egyptian pharaohs? Think again. It was all done for one single, terrifyingly practical reason: to overpower the stench of decay. You see, her body was already starting to decompose, to rot, to give off that sickly sweet odor. And so, to prevent the fine lords and ladies at the long viewing ceremony from wrinkling their aristocratic noses at the stink, they simply turned her into a giant potpourri bag. This wasn't embalming. It was a goddamn medieval air freshener. Can you even imagine? Your whole life, you're the center of the universe, worshipped and feared. And after you die, your body, your personal vessel, becomes nothing more than a stinking problem that needs to be solved, fast. It's cut open, gutted like a fish, and stuffed with fragrant herbs so you don't spoil the guests' appetites at the wake. That's the flip side of royal majesty for you. Cruel, cynical, and nauseatingly practical. Her coffin was a ticking time bomb. All right, buckle up. Today, we're digging into a story that will make your skin crawl. We're going to talk about how the coffin of a very famous queen was, essentially, a ticking time bomb. Yep, you heard me. Not some metaphorical bomb, but a real one. A ticking, stinking bomb, ready to blow right in the middle of her funeral procession. To understand the sheer insanity of this, let's dive into a little biology. When a person dies, their body turns into a bioreactor. Seriously. The billions of bacteria that lived peacefully inside you start an all-out feast. They devour you from the inside out, releasing gases, methane, hydrogen sulfide, and all that other good stuff. All this crap builds up, bloating the corpse like a balloon. The pressure builds and builds and builds. And at some point, if the deceased isn't buried in time, they can literally explode. Now, imagine that happening inside a hermetically sealed lead coffin. So, the queen dies. According to protocol, her body has to lie in state for several days before the funeral. A long procession, tons of people, everything has to be prim and proper. But nature doesn't give a damn about protocol. The process of decomposition was in full swing. And you know the creepiest part? The smell. The sickly sweet, nauseating stench of putrefaction started seeping through even the lead coffin. The people in the procession could smell it. They were walking alongside this biological bomb, wrinkling their noses, not fully understanding the risk they were in. And here's the part they definitely don't teach you in history class. Think embalming is about paying respects, about preserving a likeness for posterity? Forget it. The main, brutal, and cynical purpose of embalming back then was simply to prevent an explosion, to release the gases, to pump the body full of chemicals so it wouldn't blow itself to smithereens in front of a horrified crowd. Can you picture that scene? A solemn silence, hundreds of aristocrats in black, guardsmen in their tall hats, and then the coffin lid blows off with a deafening bang. And out of it, well, let's just say a fountain of semi-liquefied remains and putrid fluids sprays the front row, royal guts splattering the bonnets of duchesses. Shock, panic, the end of the monarchy, drenched in its own juices. That's what they were really afraid of. Not disrespecting her memory, but a total, humiliating, and stinking PR disaster. So the next time you see a lavish royal funeral, just know, behind all that pomp and circumstance lies a very practical fear. The fear that the deceased might just put on one last, very loud show. That's the deal. Subscribe if you want the truth, not the sugar-coated fairy tales. See you next time. For centuries, her coffin, rotted and swelled in the dark. All right, people, strap in. Today, we're diving into a darkness that gives even me the creeps. Forget the pristine sarcophagi you see in movies. Reality, as always, is far grimier and smellier. We're talking about what happens when you're buried a little too well sealed. For centuries, her coffin rotted and swelled in the dark, turning into a ticking time bomb. Let's jump to the 1800s. Some workmen, or maybe early archaeologists, are cracking open an old, long-forgotten vault. The air is heavy, thick with the smell of dust, damp, and decay. In the center of the crypt, they see it, a massive wooden sarcophagus. This is it, they think. History. But the moment they touched it, the ancient wood just crumbled to dust, into a fine, rotten powder. It literally disintegrated, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of grit and a few splinters. But that, my friend, was just the beginning. Inside that wooden husk, a real surprise was waiting for them. A lead coffin, heavy, sealed shut, designed to preserve the remains for eternity. Except, it looked wrong. It was bloated. Can you picture that? A metal box, its sides bowed outwards, as if it had been inflated from the inside. It looked like a grotesque, swollen tin can on the verge of exploding. They won't tell you this in the history books, but a hermetically sealed lead coffin is basically the perfect incubator for anaerobic bacteria. The body inside keeps decomposing, but the gases, all that death stink, the methane, the hydrogen sulfide, they have nowhere to go. The pressure built up over years, over centuries, pushing the thick lead outwards from within. So imagine these guys standing before this swollen monstrosity. What to do? Curiosity, of course, gets the better of them. One of them grabs a pickaxe or a crowbar and gingerly punches a small hole in the lid. Instantly, a sickening, prolonged hissing sound erupts. Pshh! A jet of compressed air blasts out of the hole, and with it, the smell. Oh God, the smell. This wasn't just a stench. This was the concentrated reek of centuries, a shockwave of rot so powerful it must have made the men's vision go black. Once the pressure subsided, they peered inside. The once luxurious velvet lining had turned into a slimy, decomposed sludge, covered in damp, dark stains of decay. Whatever was left of the woman inside had long since dissolved into this disgusting biological soup, soaking the rotted fabric. They'd wanted to preserve her body in pristine condition. Instead, they'd sealed her decay in a lead can, letting it stew in its own juices for hundreds of years. So much for eternal rest. How's that for preservation? Gruesome, isn't it? Her greatest enemy was waiting for her in the grave. All right, strap yourselves in. Today, we're talking about what comes after death. Think it's all peace and oblivion? Think again. For Queen Elizabeth I, her greatest enemy was waiting for her right in the grave. Literally. The year is 1603. The Virgin Queen, the great and terrible Elizabeth I, finally gives up the ghost. After all her victories, intrigues, and executions, you'd think she'd earned a lavish funeral and a magnificent tomb. And she got them. All of London wept as she was laid to rest. Everything was done with maximum pomp and circumstance. But what happened next is the real kicker, the kind of twisted detail the guides at Westminster Abbey prefer to gloss over. To understand the sheer tragedy of it all, you need to remember who her mortal enemy was in life. No, not the King of Spain. Her own half-sister, Mary Tudor. That's right, Bloody Mary, the devout Catholic who threw Elizabeth in the Tower of London and burned Protestants at the stake. They despised each other with a venomous, familial hatred. Each one wanted the other's head on a spike, and only a miracle saved Elizabeth from that fate. And so, when the time came to bury Elizabeth herself, a spicy little detail emerged. Turns out, they hadn't quite thought through the whole where to put her thing in the royal crypt. So what did these geniuses do? They just pried open Mary's tomb, where she'd been resting for decades, and shoved Elizabeth's lead coffin right on top of her sister's decaying one. Can you even imagine? After decades of rivalry, humiliation, and fear, her body was crammed into the same grave as the one person on earth she despised more than anyone. They don't teach you that in history class. Just picture the darkness, the stagnant air, the stench of decay seeping even through the lead. Two women who couldn't stand to be in the same room in life, now stacked one on top of the other, their remains slowly mingling in an eternal posthumous feud. Rivals in life, bunkmates in death. Talk about irony, right? England's greatest queen, sharing her eternal rest with the very woman who almost sent her to the executioner. But wait, it gets better. The juiciest part is what's happening right now. Every single day, thousands of tourists wander through the Henry VII Chapel in Westminster Abbey. They gawk at the vaulted ceilings, snap selfies, and zone out during the dry lectures about great monarchs. And with every step, their boots tread upon the floor beneath which this silent nightmare is playing out. They are literally walking all over the heads of two sisters who loathed each other, locked together for all time. So next time you're in London and you find yourself in that abbey, just stop for a second. Feel the chill of the stone beneath your feet. And just imagine that right below you, a few feet down in the rotting dark, lie not one, but two queens. And I'm willing to bet it's still very, very crowded down there for the both of them.